There is massive structural inequality, but at the same time, there is a parallel truth that we all have the capability to change something in our lives a little bit more, take a tiny step in a different direction, even if that's really, really small. I'm interested in tackling structural inequality, although that's really difficult. But I'm also interested in how can you spark all the confidence in them to say, why don't we try it this way, or why don't we try it that way? Because like you said, I think if we're all doing that, if more of us are doing that, if we all feel empowered to transcend traditional ideas and rules and patterns, then that makes for a much more interesting and exciting society where, we can make a lot more progress.
For episode 48, my guest is Jo Hunter, the co-founder and CEO of 64 Million Artists. We had this conversation during London Design Festival as part of Brompton Design District, of which the theme was material waste. We talk about how we waste our creativity and what it really means to be yourself, trust yourself, and love yourself. Ultimately, it's a conversation of how we can bring more of who we are to everything and the impact that this will have on society. We touch on many aspects of our human experience, from relationships to mental health, to parenting, to structural inequality, to leadership. At the time we had the conversation, Jo was making a baby who has now been born, and so we would like to welcome Nathaniel to the world and send our congratulations and love to Jo and Ben as they navigate parenthood. We talk about 64 Million Artists January Challenge, which you can join today if you want to bring some more creativity into your world. More information about this in the conversation. And if you would like to join my Presence Mentoring Programme for some focus on clearing your patterning and integrating supportive practices into your life, the next cohort starts in February and applications are open now. You can find out more about this over at www.amisha.co.uk/leadership. And we would like to welcome Lorraine to our team on the podcast, who is supporting us by taking over the practical aspects of sharing the blog posts, newsletter and social media posts. Another addition to our all-female team, joining Mary, our sound editor, and Lucy, our show notes editor. As always, we love hearing from you about how these conversations are moving you, so do get in touch. I hope that you enjoy this conversation. Welcome to The Future is Beautiful, with me, your host, Amisha Gadiali. On this show, we explore the weave between politics, spirituality, creativity, and sustainability. It's time for us to move beyond silos and into an integrated way of being. Every one of us has ideas and personal experiences to share that can lead us to a brighter future. This is the revolution. Despite the challenges we face as a global community or the pressures that we meet in our daily lives, when we stop and dare to dream, to ask ourselves the big questions, and to share what we are already doing, we create the future that we wish to wake up for. That future is beautiful. I am delighted today to be in the pod. So we're here opposite the Victoria and Albert Museum, the V&A, and we're in this really beautiful piece of architecture, which is a portable pod as part of Brompton Design District at London Design Festival. And I'm joined by Jo. Welcome to the show, Jo.
Thank you. It's lovely to be here.
The theme of this year's Brompton Design District is all about material consequences, essentially waste. I thought that there's a really interesting way of looking at waste, which isn't just about what we waste in terms of the litter that we throw out, the things that we don't use properly, but actually what we waste on a kind of more inner level. And one of the things that comes up a lot is that a lot of people feel like they're not creative and that they, no, that's for them. I'm not creative. I can't draw. I can't, and I've been through a mini revolution of that in myself, where I grew up very creative, and then in my teen years it all got blocked, and then I became very rebellious and then I had actually a near-death experience that when I was healing from that, I just was like, no, I need my creativity, and it was really strong for me. What
my personal experience was that when I wasn't using that creative energy, it was getting wasted, but then it was also leading me to other activities that were not nurturing and didn't always end up making me feel good. And I just feel like, wow, if that's happening inside so many of us, what relationship does that have on this culture that we find ourselves in of fast this, fast that, where there is so much waste and we have these huge landfill situations. And so, I wanted to start there with wasted creativity.
Great place to start. And actually, your story is similar to mine, actually, in that I didn't have a near-death experience, but I was someone that grew up very creative. I was really encouraged by my family to make up songs and stories and do all sorts of fun things. And then kind of, as I got older, I got more and more obsessed with getting things right or trying to be perfect or always being good at everything, and certainly being fast, trying to achieve things, and kind of found myself at this point a few years ago where I had, I felt really flat. I was very anxious, like really struggling, sort of panic attacks that were coming out of nowhere. And I was in a job that I thought was my dream job, and I was doing really well, and I was doing really fast and really good and really perfect, excellently. And so, I took a month off work and I asked different people to set me a different creative challenge to do every day, and sort of completely rediscovered this whole other side of myself, which took risks and tried things out. And I'd never done that, in so long. And it made me feel alive again. And I suddenly was like, right, I have to quit this job and start something that helps more people connect with this. Because what I find is that, I walk into a million rooms. We've worked in factories, we've worked in universities, we've worked in schools, we've worked in hospitals. And, people will often say, I'm not creative, it's not for me. But actually, as soon as you give them that freedom and that chance to just try something out, it reawakens really quickly because it is in all of us. But because it is about speed, it's partly about speed, the pace that we're living at, but it's also about people are afraid to play in the middle of kind of black and white. We have to be certain about things, or we have to be good at things, we have to achieve things. And actually, when we're driven in that way, when we're trying to get things right or be perfect, it's very difficult to be creative. It's very difficult to play or take risks or try. And I think that's what worries me about where we are. And I think that when you can encourage people to play and take time and space for themselves to investigate and explore and, take a risk, that is what wakes people up. And that's when you get the interesting things happening.
Mm-hmm. There's so many ways to go from that. But I wonder how you feel it affects society, that so many of us feel that way.
I think there are some really dangerous things that are happening in society. My favourite kind of dictionary definition of creativity is something along the lines of to transcend traditional ideas, rules and patterns, and to make new ones. What worries me is that by saying there are some people who are creative and that there are some people who aren't, we're making a massive judgment and distinction there about what people can and can't do. And when we're saying, these people over here, they can't make the rules, they can't try things out, they can't come up with new ideas, that's a lot more dangerous than saying, some people can't dance or sing or play the violin or whatever. That's about agency and personal agency. What I feel excited about is that I know that there are things like digital, for example, have opened up an opportunity where we do feel as citizens more likely to participate or try or break something and put it back together again, or fail a bit faster and try things out. That feels exciting. It feels like it's kind of bubbling up, and that's great. But at the same time, there's still, especially in things like the schooling system and a lot of work and the way that austerity makes public services, there's a lot of shutting down of we can't try, we've got to get things done and get it right, and we're going to be judged all the time if we don't get it right, and that that makes me feel really worried about society because that's where we don't make progress and we start to go backwards. So it feels to me we're at this really interesting time in society where things are bubbling up and could start to really change, and people could unlock their creativity more, and the opposite of that is also happening. So
we're constantly limiting our potential. So if we're not creative, I say in inverted commas, then we're just stuck with a life of following. Like that's all that's possible if we're not allowed to break any of the traditional patterns or rules. And if we don't have time for creativity in our workplaces and we're stuck doing things just how they've always been done, even though we know it's, say, inefficient or it's boring or it's, just not bringing out the best results, then we're so limited as a species and as a society.
Exactly. And I think there's a lot as well to do with inequality in society and some, the people that feel like they can change the rules and the people that feel like they can't. And I think one of the things that's really interesting and one of the things that we explore quite a lot is this idea of kind of the fact that there is massive structural inequality. That is just a fact that is happening around us. But at the same time, there is a parallel truth that we all have the capability to change something in our lives a little bit more, to do something to take a tiny step in a different direction, even if that's really, really small. What I'm interested in is how do you, I'm interested in tackling structural inequality, although that's really difficult. But I'm also interested in how can you spark that little idea in someone to just say, or the confidence in them to say, why don't we try it this way? Or why don't we try it that way? Because like you said, I think if we're all doing that, if more of us are doing that, if we all feel empowered to transcend traditional ideas and rules and patterns, then that makes for a much more interesting and exciting society where, we can make a lot more progress.
In order for that to happen, we have to really change the structure of what happens with hierarchy, because I have, throughout my entire working life, I have not on purpose, but I just have challenged the rules and the patterns. Because if I see a better way of doing it, I actually feel like that's my job. But it turns out that that's not your job a lot of the time. But a lot of your time, your job is to do what you've been told to do and just be quite quiet about it. And that if you are challenging things, putting new ideas forward outside of very specific moments when you're asked what you think, that you're a troublemaker. And so that has to shift, right? This openness. The same in school, anyone that kind of speaks out about anything or suggests something or says, this is boring and slow. What if we did it this way? It's again like, you sit down, like back in your place. And it brings me back to this waste element, because there are so many good ideas that are being wasted. And the more that we're told as we grow up, no, sit down, shut up, no, like don't be a troublemaker, don't cause problems, just go through life with your head down, make a good impression. Then we're losing out so much.
And I think it's, like you said, it's a really difficult thing to change. And in order to change cultures, in order to really change the way that we work, you have to look at the whole picture. You can't just inspire loads of people from the ground up and not change the system, because the system is inevitably going to stop them rising up. But I think one of the things that we do quite a bit of work, for example, in workplaces, where we will go and we won't work in a workplace unless we can work kind of all the way around it, because like I said, it doesn't work. But I think that for me, very personally, that feeling of being told no and, don't try this, or, that was a silly, to be honest, a lot of it for me was about shame and about getting things wrong and not wanting to get things wrong. And for me, the thing that excites me when we work with people is that we're trying to say, there's no shame in just having a go and seeing what happens. And if you fail, great, because you've learned something else, and then you can pass that on to the next person. And you can, so it's about creating a culture, a whole culture from the top to the bottom, or the left to the right, or whatever way that we're looking at things, where there's no shame in just having a go and seeing what happens, and whatever the outcome is a good outcome, because it's not about the product or the end thing. It's about the process and how we work together and what we're learning from each other along the way. When we're able to work like that in places, again, whether it's a factory or whether it's a university, whether it's a school, the kind of energy and the joy that brings is such an amazing thing to see, because there are, I also believe that kind of everyone really wants that. Like we often, obviously we meet resistance, and we often, it depends where we go in, like how much we say what we're doing is creativity, or how much we say it's innovation, or how much we tailor it to wherever we're going. But ultimately, everyone wants a bit more freedom. And when you can encourage that in people, it really changes the way that they're able to operate. And the shame thing, I think, is a really interesting thing, because I think there's so much of what we do, I think especially in Britain, that is very kind of like, I must be like this, or I must present myself like this. When I go to work, I must present this professional version of myself. And that is a really uncreative way to be, because you're not able to kind of bring the whole of who you are, or all of your ideas. You're constantly guarding yourself, or checking yourself, or making it change.
I find it really damaging how compartmentalised we are in this society, even compartmentalised around what we're allowed to be interested in. And one of the reasons that I started this podcast was because I felt like I was part of communities that were interested in the same thing, but didn't talk to each other, because apparently what they're doing is quite different. And so, for example, people that are into politics as a mode of change and innovation and creativity, quite a different circle to those that are into sustainability, to those that are into social enterprise, to those who kind of cross over a bit more, to those that are into more spiritual aspects, and then to those that are making music and making art. And there are a few things that cross over, and a few people like weavers that cross over. But for the most part, it's all quite simplified, and there isn't this essence of weaving. And actually, I've always been told that I'm interested in too many things, and I wonder if I lived in a pre-social media world, people didn't know that, if my life might have been easier in certain ways, because people wouldn't have then also seen something else. When that time when you started to become friends with all colleagues on Facebook. So that's actually been really positive, because that now you see people hanging out with their families that you've only ever had work meetings with. And so that crossover is happening. But I feel that what happens with this compartmentalism is that, like shame is a big part of it. Like what is allowed and what's validated in certain places. What are you allowed to show? And then that creates us to be quite, if you're always having to present a different side of yourself in every different environment, then all those different sides can be quite disjointed. That's the word. I don't know if it's possible to have to hide yourself and be different versions of yourself constantly without having an inner disjointment.
Definitely.
Of course you have to some extent. Like every single person that you talk to brings out a different side in you, so you're never the same, and we change and we grow like every minute. You and I are completely different to, well, on some level to 10 minutes ago, and that's part of nature. But still, if you're not able to express yourself fully, and of course I know then there's a line, because okay, if people go to Burning Man to say express themselves fully, and if you walked into your workplace wearing a giant nappy, for example, then I see how that's challenging. But it happens in much more subtle ways than that, and that's really where we get limited.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And I think for me, creativity is the essence of who you are. Like it's at the core of what you believe. It is, for me, absolutely connected to spirituality and the true expression of yourself. And so when you are not really being who you are, that is an immediate blocker to you being creative. And I think we're so used to be molding ourselves to appease people or to try and impress someone, or we make a lot of assumptions about what people are going to want from us. We often do that without even really knowing what they want or asking them what they want. And I think that lack of trust in ourselves, that lack of kind of confidence in ourselves to just be like, yeah, I am who I am. I'm going to show up as myself, and then I'm going to see what happens, is at the root of, all this stuff we're seeing around mental health, all this, a lot of the issues that we have in society is because we're not, even when people appear, a lot of the people in the media who might appear very confident in a particular kind of way are still doing that in a very kind of brash presentation of themselves. It's not a true and gentle confidence that comes from, I sit within my values, I trust myself, I'm expressing myself fully. For me, like one of the things that happened for me at kind of the time where, 4 or 5 years ago when things were really changing for me, is that, I was doing a lot of work on myself kind of spiritually and in terms of sort of my personal development, at the same time as having this kind of creative journey of like, wow, I'm doing all of these things. And to me, they're very hard to separate. Like it's the same thing. It's all about how can I challenge myself all the time to be showing up as who I really want to be, and and some of that is through, testing or trying or doing these little creative challenges that we do through 64 Million Artists, or it's, a much deeper spiritual examining of myself. But I think that's the work that we all need to be doing, that there's something in there that's like, and I don't want that to sound sort of very heavy and worthy, because it's not. It doesn't have to be that we all have to go and sit in the middle of a forest and meditate for 5 days and work out who we are. It's, it's that genuine thing of showing up every day and being like, oh, how could I do this a bit differently? Or, oh, that's interesting that I'm responding to that person. That person makes me feel like this. And instead of saying what I want, I'm doing this instead, and sort of noticing a lot more and noticing who we are and investigating that.
Don't worry about sounding heavy and worthy on this show.
Sure, well, no, I know.
All the time. Yeah. I think that's probably who I am at my creative authenticity.
But I think, suppose for me, one of the things that I'm really interested in, and that's why with 64 Million Artists, one of the things that we're really interested in is that thing around how do we make this stuff feel really accessible, and how does it feel like it belongs to everyone, and how do you create a really deep experience through something that is also feels like very direct and accessible, and that you could try it. And, I think that's what we're interested in, because I think so much of what's great that's happening in the world is often owned by a particular elite middle class that are getting to do all this exploration about their well-being. And actually a lot of the people who might really want to have, but don't feel that they could have time for that in their lives, or don't feel like it would fit in with who they are, like it feels exclusive to them. And that's something that I'm interested in. Yeah,
no, it's really important. It's almost like what we've done in society is we've made this sort of creativity such a big thing that you have to go spend thousands of pounds, go to Burning Man, have all these outfits, and it be this really loud, outlandish thing. And I have been to Burning Man. And it is amazing, because you turn up in a place where everything's just accepted. And so there's no judgment. And so suddenly you're free. And actually it's that inner freedom that we're talking about. So it's not like because you're being your whole self and being authentic and being creative that you're going to turn up to your workplace wearing glitter and a tail. That's sort of become the parody of the middle class creative expression. But actually it's about being in flow, being connected to yourself and kind of feeling that flow, so that you're open and ideas are coming through you and you're feeling able to express them. And it might not look any different, but it feels different.
Yeah. I think that's, so we did this really lovely project. It's one of the first ever projects that we did in a factory in Folkestone, where we worked with people. It was about 500 workers across kind of the factory floor, the warehouse and the offices, and they were interested in kind of developing a culture of creativity. And the way that the shifts work, certainly on the factory floor, is like they're about 12 hours long. You get a half-hour break, 2 20-minute breaks. But the factory agreed that everyone could have one extra 20-minute break a week. And so we worked with the staff from across all the different departments to devise these kind of creative challenges that people could do in 20 minutes. And each sort of little team could shut down their line for 20 minutes and try something out. Really simple, it's hardly anything. It's 20 minutes a week. For 10 weeks they did it. And one of the things that I loved about that program is that at the end we were talking to them about what had happened and what they got out of it. And one of the bosses said, we have a suggestions box in our work that it never ever has any suggestions in it, and now it's full. People feel like they can have a little bit more control over their environment. They want to decorate the canteen. Someone said, I don't feel like a number anymore. I feel like I know everyone, and like they know who I am, and we know a bit more about each other. Just sharing the things that we like to do out of work. That's often something we'll do. If we're going to workplace, it's the first thing that we'll ask people, like, what do you all like to do out of work? And they all say it. And then you can see all these faces around the room like, no way, you do that. That's so cool. Or, oh, I do that as well. How funny. I've never seen you there. And this idea that we're kind of holding back that whole bit of our lives when we turn up. It's just a really small and subtle thing. It doesn't have to be about glitter. I mean, I love a bit of glitter, but that little thing, that little act of sharing more about yourself is massively creative and massively is a catalyst for making change in a place. Because, when we know people, the more I find about you, the more I trust you, like the more I feel comfortable to be more of me. And it's just kind of a positive cycle. It should be a positive cycle where we do more and more of that. So yeah, that's what I love about the work that we do, is often it feels like we're kind of smuggling in creativity. It's not, we're not big creative gurus. We don't go in and do kind of big workshops with people where we completely change their life, or, it's very small and it's very subtle. And hopefully because of that, it's pretty sustainable, because we always co-design our programs so that they, it's in the hands of the people who we're working with, so that if we then leave, they're owning it themselves. We're always trying to do ourselves out of a job in that way. And that's one of the things I think I'm really proud of, because I think that kind of state. I also think, I also like going to the forest and doing something crazy for 5 days. I think we all need things like that in our life, but I also think we need those really small day-to-day things that change the way we are.
So that we can be more alive and awake on the day-to-day. That's really what it's about.
Yeah. To enjoy our lives more, to have more nourishing relationships with each other, to stay well and functioning. I think there's a lot going around us, especially being somewhere like London. You're just constantly overstimulated, but at the same time there's often a lot of sort of shutting down and pushing out, and actually to stay connected to yourself and to others, it is about those little things that you just have to practice.
What I love is that it's not, you don't have to write a poem or do a painting. Can you give us some examples of some of these little acts of creativity that have been co-designed in different workplaces?
Yeah, so we're actually, so one of the things that we're doing at the moment is we're running a little, we're doing this big piece of work around mental health. So we do something in January called the January Challenge, where every day in January we set a little creative challenge for 30 days, and we call it Do Think Share. So you do the challenge, you reflect, you think about what it was like, and then you share it online with other people. About 7,500 people did the January Challenge this year.
That's individuals, not in workplaces.
That's individuals, sorry, yeah. And then so we've modelled that same thing in workplaces, and also we're now trying in small groups online with people specifically around kind of anxiety and low mood. So the challenges that we might set in any of those places might be something like, take a different route to work and document it. Or it might be, write a poem about Mondays, or draw from the view from your window, or dance in the toilet cubicle without anyone knowing. But yeah, also, some of the things that we've tried over the last few days in this program we're running at the moment is, call a friend that you haven't spoken to in at least a month. It really interestingly, a lot of kind of initial resistance to that of like, oh God, I just don't call people in the same way anymore. Or it was really nice. We ended up having people that called each other like in the group, strangers calling each other in the group. So some of it is sort of traditionally what you might think of as kind of arts or creative. And then the other stuff is, go out. Today's challenge is something about kind of go and find something in nature and find out what it is, like explore. And we had the other day was collect 5 leaves, and people were showing how the season was changing, and walking and noticing is often a really powerful one for people, in that because we often walk from one place to the other and have our head down or our headphones in, and we don't really notice what's going on around us. Whereas actually when we walk down the street and we're trying to notice as many things that we can see that are blue, or look at the words on the street signs, or, do something like that, it can really lift our spirits.
Do you think it makes a difference to how we feel about ourselves if we feel that we are creative or not creative? So I'm just thinking back to when I went through this period after being driven over by a 4-wheel drive pickup truck, when I kind of was like, I feel like my creativity has been locked in and I need to be doing things that are creative. And actually a lot of the people around me said, well, you are creative, like the way that you've organized your bedroom, like the way that you dress yourself. Like there are all these little ways that we're constantly being creative. And I think sometimes we don't notice, and it can be quite helpful just to look around at our lives and be like, oh yeah, like look at what I've created.
Yeah. It's very so often again, like I'll go in and give a talk somewhere or something, and I'll say, put your hands up if you think you're creative. And depending on the place, it will often be hardly any, or, maximum sort of 50 or 60%. And then I'll say, how many of you have made up an excuse about somewhere you needed to be and you weren't? Or like, how many of you have solved a problem to do with like feeding your kids or sorting something out before going to work this week? Or how many of you all those things that we do naturally, where we kind of, we're in a situation where we feel stuck and then we kind of work our way out of it, or we try something new, or we have a go. Like we're doing that all the time. Everyone is naturally creative. But again, it's a question of language, isn't it? I think sometimes we have words, certainly, so my background is really in the culture sector and arts and culture, where the language problem is so, is so huge, because creativity, the arts, they have all these sort of connotations about who they're owned by, and, the fact that it is about being alternative, or it's sometimes, again, a lot of people see creativity in the arts as being something that's quite elitist, or it's for a particular kind of person, or that the arts is owned by a few, a small group of people, which if you look at the cultural sector, it probably is. But in terms of culture as a whole and creativity as a whole, it's not. We all have that in our lives, but the language has kind of been co-opted to make it feel like we don't have that. And of course, some of us are naturally, we're born more expressive, or we've been encouraged from a really young age to be more expressive. And so it comes more naturally to us to do that a lot more in our lives than than some other people do. But it's something that can be brought out in anyone because it is innate in us, I think.
How do people share that they feel after they've done the 64 million artists challenge?
So we have a real range of stuff. And like I said, the thing that we're really interested in at the moment is we've seen a lot. We say 90% of people doing the January challenge said that it improved their well-being. And one of the things that we're looking at is kind of why that is. And I think that there's a kind of combination of two things, because we do this do, think, share thing. The doing, so this idea that you're doing something, might be really silly, build a tower from what you can find in the cupboard, or make a new recipe, or do all this stuff. But just the fact that you did something that you didn't think you were going to do that day, or that you hadn't done for years, or you'd never done, or gives people this sense of agency of like, oh, I suppose if I could do that, then I could do this. So often people feel that they said, I felt empowered, that there was all these things I didn't think I could do and I did, or I feel enthusiastic or excited, or I've got more energy. But also one of the interesting things is that because we then get people to reflect on it and then share it, often in a group of strangers or at work, in different environments where they might not normally open up in that way, they're allowing themselves to be a bit more vulnerable. So they're kind of, again, like I said, sharing a bit of themselves they wouldn't normally. And so what we get is this very beautiful thing that happens where these complete strangers suddenly start sharing quite profound things. So we, in the January challenge, again, like I said, you can share with whoever you want. But there is a Facebook group of about 1,500 people who choose to share in that group. And, this year we had people who had recently lost a partner or a loved one. We had people going through separations. We had people who were ill themselves or who were nursing someone that was ill. All sorts of stuff going on in their lives. And just these tiny little challenges were getting them to open up about their day. And then every day, all these people would say, so someone would say, oh, I found the challenge quite difficult today because I'm at home with depression and I can't seem to get out of bed, but I did this. And everyone would rally around and say, that's amazing what you've done, or like, have you tried this, or blah, 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 this lovely community that emerges because this sort of, we're allowing ourselves to be kind of fractionally a bit more vulnerable and open. And then, so a lot of people, that's what they say they take out of it. And that's why we're really interested in kind of modelling this new thing where we're essentially testing that January challenge model in a group of 20 people in a WhatsApp group for anxiety and low mood. And we're just in the first month now. We'll do a couple more months after this. What I love about it is those two things we don't get in the same place very often. So we might be in therapy, we might be in a one-on-one situation where we're getting support to kind of change, look at what we're doing differently. Or we might be in a group where we're in a creative group, we're trying something else, but, we're getting that stimulation of trying something new. But actually that idea that we can try to do those things together, so you can get the stimulation of making your brain work in a bit of a different way and looking at things differently, but then the reflection and the sharing also gives you that kind of peer support and community. There's something, we're trying to work out what it is, but there's something magical that happens there that seems to have quite a transformative effect on people. And again, we're asking people to do things that take about 10 minutes a day. It's not a massive, personal investigation, but the idea of doing that for a month and doing it in a peer support group seems to really help people.
Well, it's the opposite of shame. It's people pointing out, where your wonder and your beauty is.
Exactly, yeah, and being seen. You're by sharing these little things that you're being seen every day for something that you actually are, not something that you're kind of trying to make up or that you're, pretending about. It's you're being vulnerable and open, and immediately you tend to get this reward, I suppose, of being, someone saying, oh, thank you for sharing that, or, oh, I felt like that too, or this is what I've tried with my thing. It's this kind of very generative community. And we've really, we've been so lucky with the January challenge, we've never, ever had any trolling, which you can imagine when that many people are taking part. No one's ever said, oh, this is rubbish. It's just people are really, really supportive and open and generous. And then, we've been in a situation this week on Twitter with something else where, we're not in that environment. We're in just a normal Twitter environment and it's horrible and boring and people are sharing each other and you just think, oh, those sort of situations drive me mad.
Yeah,
So,
I have little tolerance for those on social media now. So social media is enough as it is. And then when you get into that stuff, it's like block, unfollow.
Exactly, I'm done.
It's kind of the opposite of the shaming and what happens when we're so private about everything, because actually, I guess what's happening with the challenge is that people are sharing things that are their experience, and then other people are able to go, oh, yes, I feel like that too. And suddenly these things that have been shameful secrets, things that you can't ever present out, become things that you can actually just connect to other human beings about. And I feel like that's almost the biggest danger that we have with this culture of presenting our best selves or presenting the accepted version of ourselves, that we create this illusion that everyone else is better, everyone else is perfect, everyone else is getting it right, everyone else knows what to do. Other people don't have days like this. You just kind of imagine that everyone else that you've ever met never lies in on a Sunday morning and watches Netflix in bed.
Exactly.
Or whatever it is. We create these images, even though we know that that's probably not true based on the other human beings that we know quite well. But definitely we kind of create these sort of images of other people, and I think that's really dangerous to our mental health. And this idea that I'm flawed, they're not. And when we just go, oh yes, every human being is flawed, and actually in very similar ways, just plays out slightly differently, but not that differently, then there's a huge sense of relief that comes with that, and permission to be yourself.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that the shame thing is one of the biggest things that we're facing. And, you know, shame feels like a massive word. It feels like we must be talking about, you know, I'm ashamed because something massive happened to me when I was younger, or I'm ashamed because of this awful thing in my past, you know, all this sort of stuff. That's not what we're dealing with on a day-to-day basis. Shame is about, I don't think I'm as good as you, or I'm fatter than I think I want to be, or I'm thinner than I want to be, or I'm not as sexy as so-and-so, and like all these judgments that we're making about each other all the time. I'm not clever enough. I do a lot of I'm not clever enough. And interestingly, we now run a leadership program for academics, which is like something I never thought I'd do, because I was always just so terrified of academics, because I'm like, I'm not intelligent. I can do the feeling stuff, but I can't do the thinking stuff. It's really toxic. You know, it's really worrying, the stuff that we do around shame in our day-to-day. It's such a cycle, because one of the things that I really noticed is, as I started to become more in touch with myself, more open, more happy, and I started my own company, and people started to like what we were doing, then people would ask me to come and talk at things like this, or, you know, give a talk or do all that stuff. And then it's very easy to get sucked into presenting this side of yourself that everyone seems to buy into, that you're like vulnerable, but you're also open, and you're really positive and really warm. And so everyone's like, you know, and then to suddenly feel like, oh God, well, that means I have to be all of those things all the time. You know, this cycle that we do to ourselves where we're kind of constantly getting back into shame. It's so debilitating. Whereas if we can, again, for me, the thing is about this sort of daily practicing of being kind to yourself, trying to remind yourself that, again, everyone's doing the same thing as you. So you've got to do it for yourself. But if you are in a situation where you can see that from different people every day, you can see that they're on the same journey, they're all trying something new, they're all having a go. It gives you, permission is the right word. And permission is something we talk about a lot in a lot of the different work that we do, because it's about giving yourself permission, but it's also like feeling like you've been given permission from the people around you. And that feels like a much more tolerable place to be in life, if you can feel like you've got that.
Yeah, absolutely. That there's no place that you get to where all of that goes away, like you said, once you're giving talks or whatever it is. I've been told on this show by some people that I know that I share too much about myself, and, you know, I shouldn't, and I'm not like famous or established enough to share certain aspects of my vulnerability, and it's going to reflect badly on me, or the audience just want to hear from the guest and I'm wasting their time, you know, all kinds of things that people have said. And I'm like, okay, that's a lot of information. Like, what do you do with that? And then on the other hand, other people will write in and say, okay, well, I connected because you said, you know. And so it's just, if you try and keep up with any of that stuff, it gets really confusing and just too much, and you can't do anything.
And exhausting.
Yeah. And so if you're able to just connect to, okay, well, what feels right in the moment? And I might not necessarily stand by that decision to say that word or whatever it was in in 10 years, but that's what happened, and that's okay.
Yeah. I really had this really defining time just after I set up the company. So just after that sort of beginning time of starting to realise this was what was happening for me. And I've been accepted on this leadership programme, the Claw Leadership Programme, which is really prestigious in the cultural sector. It's a really exciting thing. And the first thing that you do is kind of go away for 2 weeks to this remote dairy farm and discover who you are. And it was really interesting because we got there, and I think on the second or third day, we'd done some quite intense work the day before. And then on the third day, we were doing like coaching training. And I just walked into the room that day and I was like, I actually can't listen to anyone else today. Like that is going to be really too tough for me. I'm overwhelmed and I can't manage it. And I basically like got up and left and had a little cry and was out for the rest of the afternoon. Then we came back in and came back in and we were doing action learning, and they like picked me to be the person that was like talking and about what was going on for me. And I like cried, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, the next day, so got back to my bedroom that night and thought, oh God, like exposed myself in front of all these like really impressive people. And we did this every morning. We would do these sort of reflections. And I said in the group, I just wanted to thank everyone. Yesterday I had a tough day, and it was really great that you were all fine with it. And it was really interesting that some of them basically said, I was really scared of you because I thought, I knew about what you'd done in your career, and you seem so confident, and I didn't really want to talk to you because I just felt like you would be really perfect and you wouldn't, have anything. We wouldn't have anything to say to each other. And now I feel like I really know you and that you're a really nice person, and that, that your openness not only makes me like you more, it also makes me want to be more open. And it was so transformative for me, that moment, because I had spent so long in my life with circles for that a lot of people there would be from, trying to be impressive and trying to be, friendly in a particular way, and being smart and having it all together, and actually realizing that people didn't want me to be like that. They wanted me to be real, and when you are real with people, you get better relationships, and you feel better, they feel better. It's something that works for everyone. And yeah, occasionally we get shamed, especially as women, for being vulnerable or crying in the office, or, but that's not anything to do with you. That's to do with people's fear of vulnerability. It's around this impression that we have that being vulnerable is being weak, which is just rubbish. On the whole, like 95% of the times that I have allowed myself to be open and vulnerable, I have been rewarded by, people saying, thank you so much. Like, I really appreciate it, because now I feel like I can do that as well. And so that is something that I, in my life, that is my strongest value, is that if I can show up as really being myself, that's the most likely that I am to help other people do that too,
And when it's really genuine, people feel it.
Yeah.
And they feel moved by it. And if you're showing up trying to be impressive when you don't feel impressive, then people can also feel that on another level. They can feel the fear underneath. And no one knows. Most people wouldn't even have the vocabulary to understand what they're feeling, because it all happens so quickly in a room. You watch someone do a talk. You sit down, have a drink with someone. It's all happening really quickly, and you're not necessarily thinking, oh, how does this person make me feel? Do I trust this? You're not having that in a dialogue necessarily. But yeah, when you're able to show up in that genuine way, it's just that sigh of relief and connection, and you're building things that are real.
Yeah. And that, for me, I can feel it a lot more. I suppose that's the thing that's changed for me through this idea of kind of practicing all this stuff all the time, is that I feel, it doesn't mean that I don't do it. It doesn't mean that I don't kind of sometimes snap into trying to be impressive, or, but immediately now I can feel that's what I'm doing. I can feel it in my body, oh, I see what I'm doing here. I'm feeling a bit worried about the situation and I'm trying to handle it like this, and immediately then I'm feeling more anxious and being a bit more worried and whatever. Or I feel like, okay, here I am. I'm in my body. I'm all right. And that's where I'm constantly trying to get back to all the time. Because, I think it goes back to all that stuff we've been saying around mental health and where we are, not being vulnerable, not being yourself is exhausting. And it's a really easy habit to slip back into, but it's something that I want to promote to others and to myself. And to myself is the hardest, is to continually show up as myself, regardless of what that means. The reason I used to feel so scared when I was with academics is because but I'm not as clever as someone who's done a PhD in something that we're talking about. I can't have that conversation with them on that level. That is not possible for me. And
you don't have to.
And I don't have to. But the thing that I could bring to the conversation is, the way I feel things, or the way that I'm able to connect with other people, or the way that I understand people. That's what I have to offer. And it's really, I'm really proud that actually one of the big things that we're doing is really tackling that kind of fear that I had, because I now understand, I've got this, academics need this thing that I have, which is connection and community and being able to communicate ideas and that sort of thing. So I can help them, and they can help me by doing heart surgery when I need it, or writing a book about something that needs to be understood in the world.
And so if we're always trying to be what we think the other person needs, and we're probably actually never being the thing that they need.
Exactly.
Because, the world needs us all to be more of who we are and alive, and we're all unique, and we have something, a perspective to bring that no one else is bringing. And that's our creativity.
Exactly.
And also it's about then knowing which aspect of yourself to bring in a certain situation, and that coming from a place of freedom to be yourself. And then, of course, there might be times where you're like, okay, well, this is a pitch, so I do have to be a bit more impressive. But I have to be impressive to the point where I'm so nervous that then I'm not impressive.
But that's the thing, my business partner, it's not his quote, it's someone else's, but I can't remember who he took it from. But he always says, if anyone asks him what to do in an interview or a pitch or anything like that, he says, be yourself with skill. It is, of course, you're notching up, or you're putting loads of preparation, or you've learned something specific, but it has to come from you. If you're trying to pretend, it's always going to go wrong. It's always a disaster. Either it's a disaster immediately because people can sense it and, they see that they don't want you for that interview or whatever, or you get into the job on false pretenses because you've tried to be this person, and then you're miserable, or you're constantly worried. I was always so worried because I'd progressed quite quickly as a leader and was doing all that. I was just constantly worried that someone was going to find out how rubbish I really was, and that that I hadn't really done anything that well, and blah, blah, blah. I was just I lived my life in this constant state of anxiety, even though I didn't even necessarily notice that I was doing it. It was just that I was sort of on edge, and we're going. I think a lot of that being fast is about that. Like, oh, I've got to keep going. I've got to keep everything juggling as much as I can, because if I drop something, everything is going to fall apart. And now, you know, I still sometimes feel incredibly anxious, but I'm like, I find it overwhelming at the time. I probably experience the anxiety rather than kind of trying to sit on top of it. And then I'm like, oh, okay, now I can get over it and move on.
Well, you look extremely chilled out, sitting here creating a human right now, ready to come into the world in a few weeks.
Yeah. Yeah. And that, you know, that has been, you know, it's been really amazing for me. Like, I'm 8 months pregnant. That person that I was before, which, you know, is still a massive part of me, which is that kind of perfectionist or trying to get everything right, would have read all the books, would have tried to be getting it perfect, would have known exactly what I wanted Labour to be like, or how exactly I would have had the name written down. And whereas now I'm really proud. Like, I haven't read any books, really. I probably maybe should have read more. But that I am just trusting myself that babies get born all the time and then they, then parents look after them. And the thing that I think is, if I can be really connected to myself and to my husband and connected to the baby when he arrives, like that's the best thing I can do. Like, and then in the moment, to me, that's what creativity is. It's responding all the time from a place of, here I am, I know where I am, I know who I am. Being able to pivot and change and try and whatever, that's what you need, I think, in order to be a parent, is you need that ability to be creative, which we all have. But often, again, the more I'm starting to understand about parenting, it freaks me out because there's so much judgment, there's so much kind of, it should be like this or it should be like that. And that is totally taking away a parent's instinct to have a go, to try something or have a go at it. And that to me is really worrying. All the mums that I know who have had issues with anxiety is because they're trying to get it right, which is impossible. It is impossible to be the perfect parent. So you have to be able to let that go. And I hope, I'm sure it will be, who knows what it'll be like when it happens, but the only thing you can prepare for is being unprepared and having some resilience and some confidence in yourself in that time. And that's, I suppose, what I've been doing over the last 4 years. So now I feel ready to put it into practice.
And so then you can trust yourself.
Yeah.
And trust the mistakes, trust whatever, because it doesn't matter, because you're trying, you're there, you're trusting, you're working with your instincts.
Yeah. And you're being loving. You're, again, creative, embracing your creativity, I think, is loving yourself and loving others. And if you're coming from that place of loving yourself and loving others, then, that's ultimately the only place you can start from, isn't it? So yeah, I think I'm really pleased. I never would have seen that, all this work that I've been doing in my work life and across my personal life. Like, I'd never really thought about it as how it would prepare me for being a parent, but I think that hopefully it really has.
Hello, this is Amisha. We are just taking a little break from the conversation here. On behalf of myself and the team, I want to say thank you for being part of creating a beautiful future. We make this for you so that we will all have the vision, wisdom, and activism we need at this time to weave a new narrative. Can you help us with this? You can do that by making a monthly donation to the podcast to cover our costs. Just the equivalent of a fair trade banana you might eat or a chai latte you might drink whilst you listen to this will make a huge difference to us. Head to www.thefutureisbeautiful.co/community to become a monthly patron. And the other thing is to tell your friends about this podcast so they can tune in too. Send them a message or post on social media and let them know what you love about it. And whilst you're at it, leave us a review. And now, back to the conversation. Thank you for your loving beauty.
What did you find in your study on mental health and well-being and creativity?
Well, so we're still right in the middle of it at the moment. So we're doing this study with UCL, which will end around Christmas time. But one of the things that we've kind of looked at sort of anecdotally since the beginning of the year is particularly this stuff around is about agency and connection. So this idea of kind of community, being able to be open enough to try something out in a community will improve the way that you feel about yourself and the way that you're kind of validated within that community. And that's the thing that we're kind of pursuing now, because we feel like it could be, again, I think it could be quite revolutionary in the way that we think about treating mental health. There's huge pressure on the NHS, and a lot of what's happening is people want one-on-one services, but they can't get them because there's so much pressure on the NHS. It's very difficult to see someone one-on-one. And then even sort of thinking about kind of group situations can be very expensive to facilitate. And so that's why we're kind of looking at this model of, if you are in a peer support group of 20 and you've got this little program of 30 things to do over 30 days, there's something that happens in that group where the program itself is kind of holding the facilitation, like it's facilitating. But also we're looking at, does it need human facilitation as well, or does it need some sort of machine learned facilitation, or how? We're looking at all the options for that. But basically we think that it could be a scalable way of kind of looking at mental health, maybe on the NHS or within the community or through social prescribing. Could that be when you are initially able to identify as saying, I'm struggling with anxiety or with low mood, could you go straight to something like that rather than sitting for 6 months on a waiting list and before you're seeing someone one-to-one? So that's kind of where we're at with it at the moment, which feels like really, really, really exciting. Mental health is a massive part of my life. Like, I've definitely really struggled with anxiety. My husband has had periods of really significant depression, and it's something that I feel like hugely passionate about. And I think one of the things that we notice from the group is that people might not want to identify as having a diagnosed mental health condition, but they are certainly struggling. And so they might not go to they might not want to go to therapy, or they might not want to go to a therapeutic support group, but they would do something like this because it's kind of a different way in, or a different way of looking at it. You don't have to talk about your feelings massively all the time, but somehow sort of slowly and gently this culture emerges of people talking about important things.
There's no stigma attached to, I'm just embracing my creativity more.
Exactly.
Whereas if you're like, I'm having therapy, ooh.
Yeah,
like,
exactly. There's something wrong with me.
Because we have this culture where things have to get really rough before you ask for help.
Yeah.
Or do like inquiry into yourself and into your own patterns. It's not something that we grow up feeling is an important part of ourselves. I actually asked for a therapist when I was 12.
Wow.
Yeah, because my parents are psychiatrists and my dad's a Jungian analyst. So I thought, I guess I understood from a very early age that normal people, the people that came to my house every weekend and evenings who looked perfectly normal, they were seeing an analyst, you know. So that we all have human struggles. And, I was told that, in a sense, kind of grown-up things, grown-up struggles. Except I was like, well, I think I've got them now. And as it happened, I didn't end up seeing a therapist when I was 12. I wonder how. My parents knew all of them, so I think they thought it was a joke, to be honest. It wasn't a joke. But because of the way that I was brought up, and because I went to psychiatric conferences as a child, I kind of had a different opinion. I thought that for me, there was never that stigma attached with it in the same way, except when I talked to other people about it and I said my parents are psychiatrists, you get this ooh, like people like sort of back away. And it happened all the time, and I watched it happen to my parents as well, and they'd be like, just don't tell people that, because it just creates this actually fear. You're going to see through the carefully perfected image that I'm putting out to keep everything safe. And so because we only think to do it, to explore ourselves and our patterns when something goes wrong, that's been the way that this society works. As we're getting more and more open about that, and obviously American culture has probably helped with that, because, I have friends in America. I was staying with them in LA, and they were like, oh, I'm going to be busy on Wednesday afternoon. I'm like, oh, what are you doing? Oh, we're going to couples therapy. And I was like, oh, are things not good? And they were like, no, things are great. We just go to couples therapy so that things stay great. And it's like, oh, that's interesting. I remember years ago thinking, wow, in England, I do know one couple that do that, but I can't think of many people as a societal norm that'd be like, yeah, let's just go to couples therapy to just keep everything good.
We do that. Yeah. I mean, partly, like I said, my husband has struggled with his mental health, but I think, and I have, but yeah, we chose to go at a time when actually things were kind of fine, it was all okay, and we will definitely keep going when we have the baby, even though, we've had everything's been going really well for the last 6 months but we still go because it's really important. If we stopped going, that would be maybe when things would break down, or it's just a useful reminder to kind of, to check in with each other, to have those conversations. And it will be more important when we have a baby because we'll forget to have those conversations, or, it's about making time. I think it's massively, massively important. And also I think, the thing that excites me about creativity and its connection to mental health is, a lot of people who are diagnosed or are seen as having a mental health problem, a lot of it is that they just don't fit into society.
Absolutely.
and that is just, it makes me really upset and makes me cross. But it's also, I think that we instead of seeing it as this kind of, oh God, we've got this epidemic of mental health issues, it's like, no, we don't need to treat lots of people necessarily in one-on-one therapy. We need to kind of, maybe we need to do that too. And if everyone could afford to be in therapy, great. But if we adjust our society to allow people to talk about difference and to to work in different ways and to have different kinds of relationships and to present themselves as different, wear whatever they like or express themselves and their sexuality in whatever way they like, then that would reduce our mental health issue, I'm using quotation marks, significantly, because it's actually the fact that we're just not being open and sharing and trying, being free to be ourselves. Don't get me wrong, there are some people with some really significant issues who would continue to struggle in a society like that. But I think we need to look at mental health in a much more holistic way. And I love my husband. I love the fact that his brain works a bit differently from a lot of people's. He sees the world completely openly, and he's so loving, and he's so kind of open to different ways of being and how people are. And often that is not rewarded by a society that wants people to be in a particular way. When your confidence grows in yourself and who you are, then it stops being an issue because you can kind of carry that quality and carry it with you. But when you grow up and that's not necessarily how people see how you are, people don't reward you for that. They tell you you're wrong, you're doing it wrong, you're late, you're not concentrating properly or whatever. That's when you feel like you've got a problem because everyone's telling you you've got a problem. So actually maybe you don't have a problem at all. You're just being you. And being you is what's needed. We need more people being different in the world and having different ideas and showing up differently. Absolutely.
And the point that you make about it being that you just don't feel like you fit in to society is just so important. And there's a culture here with so many things where actually it's all us, the consumer, the citizen, the average Joe. Like, we've got to fix everything. And it's like, actually, we're like this. It's not our fault that we're not fitting into society. It's society that needs to adjust to be more open and to create a society where we feel safe and able to be more of ourselves and more alive and more connected to our purpose and more able to express who we really are. And it's just like with consumerism, we need to buy less stuff. And it's like, well, okay, but could you stop selling us stuff all the time? If you want us to buy less stuff. But of course, all of these, there's so many different elements at play because it's no longer a government that is in charge of society. Now we have a global society and we have corporations, and so it's a whole different ball game. And it's interesting is when we're talking about waste and material consequences, and buying things is a huge way that we express our discomfort with ourselves. or that we try to fit in more. So it's like, okay, it starts right from when you're a kid, doesn't it?
Yeah.
If I could just get those trainers.
Magic step shoes, that's what I wanted.
If I had those shoes that all the other girls have at school, then like they won't tease me. And it's like, so straight away we're kind of like into this needing stuff. And now that's gone to such a huge extreme that a lot of us are addicted to shopping, addicted to stuff. We don't know what to do with it. We have to have the latest of everything. And now we're in a world that's completely overwhelmed with stuff. And then that's overwhelming us even more because the stuff is everywhere.
Yeah.
And so there's this sort of balance, isn't there, of like us taking personal responsibility for our well-being and then also recognizing and not like as a kind of victim, but I guess as an activist, that a lot of what we have to work together to change is something that is cultural and much bigger than just us.
Absolutely. And I think, that it's like I said at the beginning, there are massive structural inequalities and we all have the agency to do something a bit different. And both of those things are true. And ultimately, when we talk about society, there is no invisible society outside of us. Like us is everyone. Like we are all participating in society. There's no one person. Yes, people have more power, but in terms of all of that stuff is kind of invisible and made up, isn't it? Like the economy is just made up. Like there's lots of people just making up things and talking about it.
But they sound so proper when they
do. Where our place in society, we all can make more of a difference. But at the same time, I totally understand why loads of people would just feel that they could, a lot of people feel like they can't, and they can't in lots of ways make a difference to something that's really important to them. And that is really, really frustrating and really, really difficult. And that's one of the things that I think we just have to constantly work with and that's why I suppose I'm interested. It's why we do quite a lot of work in workplaces, because I'm interested in how do you use this stuff around individual change to also change a culture. Like whether that's a culture of a city or a culture of a country or a culture of a workplace or a culture of a family, what's the balance there between everyone trying something out and taking a bit more responsibility and having a go at something and being creative, and everyone around them also doing that and listening to them and learning from each other and keeping that going. Those two parallel things are the things that I think about all the time, because I don't think we could all be as empowered citizens as we want, but if those structural inequalities aren't changing, or we can't influence government, or we can't influence corporations or whatever, we can't make change. And if they start to make change and we don't, or, again, I'm making this false distinction between us and society. Doesn't exist. But all of that stuff has to happen basically in order for change to happen. Like those things need to happen at both ends. And often I think we get stuck because we're blaming, the individual's being blamed or the society's being blamed. And that's just not a generative and interesting place to come from.
Yeah.
It's like, actually, we're all facing lots of challenges. So how could we use our innate creativity to overcome these together?
It's a reciprocal relationship. So the more that individuals do it, the more that nudges society, and the more that society does it, the more it nudges individuals. And we just have to keep doing our best.
Exactly. And keep showing up as ourselves, keep saying it's not working, I don't know the answer. I'd love more politicians to say, don't know what the answer is. Can we talk about it more, please? Because actually we're dealing with a lot of really complex stuff, and no one should be expected to know all the answers to everything. So again, it's like, it goes back to that thing of how do we use our creativity to be in a place where we can pivot and change and try, because that's the important thing. The important thing is not knowing everything. You need knowledge, of course, and you need expertise, but then, you crucially, in complex situations, you need the ability to listen and respond and have a go and be open to it failing and then have another go and have that resilience. Like that's the ultimate thing that we need in order to really make change.
I just had a nice vision then of because I worked in politics, so I kind of know what that's like from the inside. And a lot of the training is more like debate style. You know, it's like, how do you win an argument? Like, how do you get this set of ideas across? And actually, it's not even like, and you know, that these ideas have to be connected to your heart and your values. It's almost like, how can you take anything that you're given on a piece of paper and just make that win? And actually, if we could shift our politicians into being facilitators, send them to the art of hosting and all of these wonderful facilitation trainings, and then have them show up as like, okay, so I'm here to listen, to find out, to inquire, to help kind of pull out the knowledge that we have and present it. And that would be such a game changer.
Definitely. Like the leader as facilitator, like I think is the biggest thing that we could do, like in order to really transform, to create a culture of creativity. Because creativity does not thrive in an environment where it's, information and hierarchy from the top down. Because then you get stuck in your places, you get stuck in the way that you are. And the leaders are inevitably somewhere underneath all that kind of panicking and feeling worried that they have to do something specific. And I think if we can equip leaders and remind leaders that like it is the bravest thing to do, it is the most leaderishness to really be, to be vulnerable enough to ask the question. That's, that makes me really excited about what society could be like.
Great. So you need to start the leaders leaderish training.
Yeah, I'll do that. I'll put that on a pitch. Someone will buy it.
What do you feel like society, the world, would look like if we just clicked our fingers and everyone was like creative?
Well, everyone already is creative.
Okay, sorry.
But if they were flexing their creativity more.
If we clicked our fingers and everyone felt connected to their creativity.
Yeah. Well, I would hope that it would be more people would feel like they had more power. People would feel more connected to each other and to their communities and to the people around them. We'd have lots better ideas. We'd be able to solve problems in a different way. We'd all take a few more risks. Hopefully we'd feel a bit happier because we'd all be showing up as ourselves more and not trying to be something that we're not.
Beautiful. That's a beautiful future right there.
Yeah, I think so.
And the beautiful thing is that what you're describing is actually just how it feels to be more connected to your creativity.
Yeah.
And so that's something that we can all achieve on an inner level, if not an outer level, if we have the right support and network and tools.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's got to start, like I said, society has to take some responsibility and there has to be big structural change, but we can all take responsibility for trying a bit of that ourselves too. Can
you give us 3 challenges just to end with, something that we can all start doing?
3, okay. So I like the walking one. So the next time you're making a journey, take a route that you wouldn't normally take, and every couple of minutes in your journey, stop and look up at the sky and look all around you. That's my number 1 challenge. My number 2 challenge is to make up a short poem that you can keep in your pocket that you can take out at any time in the day to remind you of whatever you need to be reminded of in the day, like, a little message for yourself.
Can you give us a little example or something?
A little poem? Make up a poem now.
No, don't, but
but it might be a poem. So for me...
that already sounds a little bit hard, so I'm just asking you to break it down a bit.
Okay, yeah, you're right. It's probably too difficult. Maybe it's not even a poem. Maybe you could just, a little mantra to say to yourself every day, the thing that you like. For me, it's remember to be kind to yourself. So I might make up a little poem about being kind to myself and then keep it in my pocket. One more thing. This is like the idea of make your brain as creative as possible, and then always in this situation you're like, oh god, I can't think of any creative challenges at all. We were doing this one yesterday with the group. Make something new out of something old. So find something in your house that you haven't used for ages, or that you've find a piece of something on the street and make something. Yes, take some. Oh, look at that! I brought it right back. And make something 3, new out of it. Yeah.
Turn waste into something beautiful.
Yes, exactly. Perfect.
Thank you so much, Jo.
Pleasure.
Such a pleasure to talk to you.
And you, I've really enjoyed it.
Your website is 64 billion
64 million artists.
64 million. Billion. Yeah, we're not there yet.
Well, who knows? But population growth.
Sometimes it just seems like there's a lot more people than that. Just sitting here opposite the V&A, there are loads of people.
Exactly, they're
everywhere.
all here. All of the 64 million artists. But yeah, 64millionartists.com.
Brilliant.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for spending your precious time with us. As always, you can find links to everything we mention in this episode, download our book, and discover so much more over on the blog. We don't believe in selling you things you don't need through this podcast, and so it's made possible with you, our community. If you loved this and would like to fund our show with a monthly donation or join our online group to connect with other listeners, please visit www.thefutureisbeautiful.co and click on Community and Support. Please also share with friends, hit subscribe, and leave us a review so we can grow. Those gold stars really help others find us, so these ideas can spread. Here is to us, creating a beautiful future together. The Future is Beautiful is made by an all-female team working voluntarily or on reduced rates until our listener support grows. If you have been moved by anything you heard here, please donate the equivalent of buying us a drink. All donations make a huge difference to us and will allow us to keep doing this and remain advertising free. Until next time, I leave you with this question: how will you create beauty in the world?